Dr. Scott Jensen here. I'm not sure if I should be angry or just depressed about the topic we need to discuss today. This morning in the New York Times, the article by David Leonhardt covered the surge in school absences. Now, my impression with Mr. Leonhardt is that he leans left, but attempts to be balanced and sort of measured in his perspectives. And I've seen him take on difficult issues, looking at things from different perspectives, and I appreciate that. I think it's safe to say that the New York Times leans left. But at the risk of offending you, I'm going to use a phrase that includes a piece of profanity. When I read this article about the surge in school absences and the problem with it, the flip response in my head is, no shit, Sherlock. I mean, how could we expect anything different? Let's look at a few things that David Leonhardt points out. He says, the long school closures during the COVID pandemic were the biggest disruption in the history of modern American education. He says, absenteeism has soared, remaining high even as COVID has stopped dominating everyday life. On an average day last year, the 2022-23 school year, close to 10% of K through 12 students were not there. So a typical school day, 10% were gone. 1/4 of U.S. students qualified as chronically absent, meaning that they missed 3.5 weeks of school during the course of the school year, which is virtually a month. So 25% of kids missed just about a month of school. Thomas D. is a Stanford economist who has conducted a comprehensive study on the issue, and he says this, quote, "I'm just stunned by the magnitude," end quote. Well, what did you expect to happen? The biggest reason for the rise seems to be simply that students have fallen out of the habit of going to school every day. Well, of course they did. Our governments locked the kids out. Our government told the parents that if they tried to circumvent those government policies, they would be jeopardizing grandma's health. They would be doing the wrong thing in terms of pandemic policies. I mean, my stars. The kids were locked out and the parents were shamed. Here's what Elmer Roldan, who runs a dropout prevention group, told the Los Angeles Times, quote, "For almost 2 years, we told families that schoolwork could be accomplished in times outside of the traditional 8 to 3 day. Families got used to that." How'd that work out for us, huh, folks? Lisa Demure, a psychologist and the author of The Emotional Lives of Teenagers, said, "The most fundamental thing for adults to understand is that avoidance feeds anxiety." Quote, "When any of us are fearful, our instinct is to avoid. But the problem with giving into that anxiety is that avoidance is highly reinforcing." Boy, does that sound familiar for some of the policies that we've seen over the last 3.5 years. When any of us are fearful, our instinct is to avoid. I think policymakers understand that quite well. This article by David Leonhardt goes on to say this: classrooms are more chaotic places when many students are there one day and missing the next. He also goes on to say educational inequality increases too because the absenteeism has risen more among disadvantaged students. As Hedy Chang, who runs Attendance Work, a nonprofit group focused on the problem, she told the Associated Press this, quote, The long-term consequences of disengaging from school are devastating. Devastating. And absenteeism is not going away. It's fallen very little from last year. It's virtually the same. It's not going to go away. So when we locked kids out of school, we devastated their education. But we did a lot more than that. When policymakers decided to play God, throw mud on the wall, seize what sticks, and then throw out all kinds of policies, they created a perfect scenario for abuse in the home to expand and increase without the normal mechanisms in place for reporting such abuse. Schools and teachers are one of the key ways for social workers to find out where physical and sexual and emotional abuse is taking place. You stick a family of 4 or 5 people in a 1,200 square foot apartment and tell them you're going to live there 24/7 for the next umpteen months, you're going to have a problem. And we do. Wellness care, I can speak to that, being in the trenches. My moms and dads are absolutely foregoing a lot of the wellness care that previously they were committed to. Routine vaccines, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, measles, mumps, rubella, Varivax, chickenpox, so many others. I said this during the course of the pandemic. I said it numerous times. I got in hot water for saying it. I said, if you do this kind of thing, if you break the trust, and if you equate the COVID vaccine in regards to safety and efficacy to the vaccines that have been a part of the wellness schedule for years and decades, you're going to experience consequences that would be adverse to what you seem to promote as ideal healthcare. And that's exactly what's happened. Mental instability, there's no question. I've got more kids whose parents are entertaining the diagnosis of autism, ADD, depression, anxiety syndromes. There's no question. And the family support structure. When you play God with the kids, you're generally playing God with families as well. And when you step in and tell families what they're going to do and what they're not going to do, and when you lock kids out of school, and then you make them watch the devastating things that they watch on TV and radio, and you scare them silly. Yeah, we've created a real mess. And there were people far too willing to use political power, governmental authority to rule lives, to play God. And now we hear rumblings that these godlike humans are thinking of doing some of these same measures all over again.